What's up guys, Penguin Overlord here, and welcome back to Ghost Recon Breakpoint. In today's video, I'm going to go over how I prefer to set up my DMRs, which I use quite frequently in the game, either as a long-range option for the assault class, if I don't feel like being overpowered and using the the M82 for everything, or I'll use it as a more assault type weapon for the sharpshooter class, when I'm playing sharpshooter class. So just to go over the setup quickly, I will typically run the standard magazine, a suppressor, the MAL-DA, dual range sight, and the bipod for both the 7.62 variants and the 5.56 DMRs. That's typically what I will go with. Now let's discuss why I set up my DMRs this way. So magazine's kind of a note sort of thing. Note that if you do go 7.62 for your DMR, which that's a separate discussion, which DMR you should go with, 7.62 versus 5.56, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see such a video. But do know that if you go 7.62, you'll be limited to 15 rounds, and with a 5.56 DMR, you'll be limited to 30. So keep that in mind. Also, the 7.62s will give you more recoil, but again, I'll save that for another discussion for another video. Muzzle device, I will typically go with the suppressor, because when using a DMR, I'm trying to remain quiet and undetected. I don't necessarily want to give away my position. Yeah. And typically, I don't really like running any of the other muzzle devices. I don't think they really give you as much benefit that would be actually useful in combat, especially since you're limited to burst and semi-auto for your trigger options. So I don't think that's particularly useful in open combat when enemies are engaging you and shooting at you. I prefer full auto for that, so I typically don't use those. If the suppressor seems to work out the best for me, even if I'm using burst or semi-auto, because then enemies generally aren't aware of my presence. So that's why. Okay. Next up we have the MAL-DA, which again, as I said in my assault rifle video, is most likely the best attachment in the game, period. 15% range, which is obvious. You want to increase the range of your DMR. I'm trying not to confuse the two, because in Breakpoint, unlike in Wildlands, they're separate categories. But the MAL-DA will give you more range, which is always a good thing. Less sway, which is nice for making longer range shots, although obviously you can hold your breath in this game, which helps out even more. And less shot spread, which is nice. The greatest minus shot spread bonus. The rangefinder, I very rarely use this. The only weapon I can really think of using the rangefinder on is the SVD, the SVD 63, I believe it's called. If I can select the right one. Yes, this gun. Because that gun, you cannot attach the MAL laser to it, which means if you want extra range on your DMR, you're going to have to go with that. The appeal ×3 I typically don't use on DMRs, although I think this one would be fairly good on the Mark 14, excuse me, where you have a full auto capability. So this might be a good choice if you're trying to run one in relatively close quarters and you're trying to save your sniper rifle for long-range engagements, so like if you're playing sharpshooter, for example. I never used the PEC 15 basically for anything, like maybe shotguns. That's a separate video, but I don't use this on DMRs. It doesn't really give you anything. Hipfire recoil is really not a thing unless you get injured, which generally doesn't happen all that much in the game. Going on to scopes, there's two main scopes I use. So the dual range sight, I believe, is the best one because you can toggle back and forth from the, well, in this game, 4.5 long-range magnification and a red dot at 1 power, which is the most versatile combination. So basically, you can take out enemies very close and very far away with this combo. I also like using the ACOG, the TA31H, even though that's in this game, for some reason, it's a fixed 3 power. This one also works fairly well from medium range to close range, and if I'm up super close, I can always transition to over-the-shoulder aim and aim with the Maul laser, which, as you can see, is generally very bright if you're sneaking around bases. Like, obviously, there'll be times where you'll lose the laser, but as you can see, I'm tracking this along fairly nicely, so I can use this at close range, and obviously I've got the crosshair here, which helps. But, yeah, I'll typically use those two sights. Because I want a DMR to engage at close and further away, I typically don't stick with the fixed power scopes like the T5XI sight or the TARS 101, the digital sight, and unfortunately the ACSS sight, which I've wanted a scope like this in Ghost Recon Wildlands because it's a more modern optic. But the problem with this in the game is that it's a fixed 3.5 power, which is really disappointing because the scope is supposed to be a 1-4 or 1-6 power scope. So this really, I mean, it's a good wide of view, but it doesn't really do well at close range. Although obviously, again, I could aim with the Maul laser. So I typically don't use it though because I like aiming down sights for my engagements. But yeah, that's a little bit disappointing. This really should have variable magnification, and maybe Ubisoft will fix it, but probably not. So yeah, dual range sight or TA31H. That's typically what I go with because the ACSS has scope shadow and is hard to use in CQB, whereas with the ACOG, you could still kind of get away with aiming down sights in CQB. Next up, if I can use my menus correctly, and actually last up, bipod for kind of obvious reasons, because one, we didn't have one in Ghost Recon Wildlands, and now we do, finally. But basically all the bonuses are pretty much everything you'd want in a DMR. You've got less horizontal recoil, which is a good thing, more range, which is a good thing, and less sway, which is a good thing, so it's going to help you aim a lot better. Obviously, if you've got ballistic advantage, you've basically got like no bullet drop out very, very far. The only negative thing about it is time to aim, which isn't honestly that big of a deal if you're trying to play stealthily with a DMR. Obviously, if you're trying to run a loud one, maybe you would want to go with something else. I've used the lightweight vertical foregrip in the beginning of the game when I didn't have the bipod. It works fairly well. It's not my preferred choice, but it works well if you're trying to run a DMR loud, like the 416 Scout. I believe it fits better on the 5.56 DMRs than the 7.62 DMRs, since the 5.56 DMRs have less recoil than the 7.62 ones. So this one can work out fairly well. Not a big fan of the RVG vertical foregrip because it just basically a bunch of bad bonuses for less vertical recoil, which really isn't a factor in burst fire because the recoil on it is very low. Maybe if you were tapping out multiple bursts at once, but just not a fan of this underbarrel attachment at all. So yeah, bipod, that's basically the way I usually run, and I think it's pretty much how everyone runs their DMRs. They have always got like a bipod on it, which makes sense. It's kind of self-evident. But yeah, that's it. That's just how I set up my DMRs. So hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining. And yeah, I'll see you all soon. I'm Penguin Overlord, and I will catch you all next time. Take care, guys.